let's rank the quarterback position for 2025 fantasy football drafts. Quarterback is interesting in the sense of, normally most of your fantasy leagues have only one quarterback position. And so our strategy for drafting quarterback has been variable over the years. But if you're going to draft the top quarterback, these are the best ones that you can draft. Make sure you drop a like. Make sure you're subscribed if you play fantasy football. We're going to rank every single quarterback that we can for this year's fantasy football. And, in the S tier, I don't think many people will argue with this. Everybody would have these three guys in the S tier, in Lamar Jackson, in Josh Allen, in Jaden Daniels. I think some people would argue, hey, maybe Jalen Hurts could be in this tier. But fact of the matter is, Jalen Hurts, we've found, he's typically closer to like Joe Burrow's level of production than he is these top three guys. Lamar Jackson last year was the fantasy quarterback one, large part due to, the fact that he, from throwing the ball, threw for 4,100 passing yards last year and 41 touchdowns. It was the most of his career by 5, but the last time he had thrown more than like 30 touchdowns was in 2019 during his first MVP season. Could have won MVP last year, didn't win MVP last year. Josh Allen won MVP last year. He's also in this tier, and he was the quarterback too. Josh Allen actually threw for about 600 yards less than he normally does, but on the ground he was still dominant. He had 12 touchdowns on the ground, 531 yards, and while Josh Allen normally sits in the 410-point range, in fact, he finished within 1 point of the exact same amount of points 3 seasons in a row. 409.58, 409.24, and 410.64 in full point PPR leagues. That's actually insane. 385 last year. So you did see about, a little bit of a drop off there, about 25 points. It's nothing to be worried about. He's still going to be extremely productive. And then Jaden Daniels. Last year, he was the quarterback 5. He was quarterback 5 in points per game as well. And obviously with Daniels, he has an insane amount of upside. When you're talking about the rushing yards for Josh Allen, 531. When you're talking about for Lamar Jackson, 915. And Jaden Daniels falls right in between those two with 891. Now, the one thing about Daniels is he's not going to score as many touchdowns as somebody like Josh Allen, just because he is a little bit more thin-framed, and that is going to let the Commanders are going to be a little bit more conservative with him. But in his rookie year, only threw for 25 touchdowns, 3,500 yards, which for a top 5 fantasy quarterback is there's room to improve there. The rushing upside is undeniable, and so you have to look at these guys. All three of them have league-winning upside. Jaden Daniels won me the Flock League, so I love him forever for that. And picking Jaden Daniels in the 9th round instead of taking a guy in the 3rd or 4th round ended up probably being the draft decision that won me that league. And so it's worth considering. Price is everything with quarterbacks, but these three are the 3 quarterbacks that we think could win you fantasy leagues in 2025.
Yeah, then the A tier is really not that far behind from the S tier because you've got a rushing upside guy in Jalen Hurts, who, again, rushing upside is just going to give you such a high floor for even the down games as a passer that Hurts might have with Saquon going nuts. He's still going to continue to get the tush-push opportunities in the red zone because that is going to go on for at least another year. And he's just been very consistent since he's been a consistent starter for the Eagles over the last few years. He averaged like 21.5 points per game last year, which was right there by Joe Burrow, who's not a rushing quarterback, but continues to be one of the most consistent pocket passers in the NFL in terms of production. And I mean, the way that that Cincinnati has really decided to invest in that offense, it's all based off of Joe Burrow and his arm and passing the football up and down the field constantly all game long and scoring 35 points per game. Now, if you want to kind of look at that situation in Cincinnati and be like, Joe Burrow deserves to be in the S tier. Honestly, like I said, he's not that far off from it. 22.5 points per game, which was 3rd in the league. I mean, he was right behind Allen and Burrow. You could make an argument for that. I will say, if the Bugles want to start winning games consistently and not have a ridiculous amount of parity and risk missing the playoffs again, then they're going to have to find a different way to win games than score 35 points like their opponent. But I mean, they could very well do that again this season with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase staying on that team together. So
I have a suggestion actually for the Bengals: play defense.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
That would help.
Maybe try to slow the game down a little bit so that you're not passing the ball night and day with Burrow.
I will say they're the most probably entertaining games to watch during the NFL season. They are freaking shootouts.
It's the most entertaining.
It's awesome. Let's go to the next tier here. Baker Mayfield. Look, honestly, freaking, you could put Baker in the tier above this, and I wouldn't argue with it at all.
Sure.
Let's do it. I mean, because when you're looking at Baker Mayfield, like, he didn't really have Chris Godwin for most of the year last year. He had Mike Evans, but Mike Evans was in and out as well. So you're talking about he was playing with, obviously his running backs, Bucky Irving, Rashad White, but Jalen McMillan, Cade Otton, and the dude is the quarterback 4 on the season. 4. That is remarkable. He threw for 41 touchdowns and 4,500 yards last year. So from a fantasy football perspective, I know Baker doesn't have the sexy rushing upside. Well, I say the sexy rushing upside, but when you're looking, he actually added, 37 points from rushing yards alone last year to his fantasy totals.
He was back-to-back there with Burrow.
I mean, Yeah.
And on a points per game basis, he did outproduce Jaden Daniels.
On a points per game basis, he had 22.5 points per game. And again, the situation, now you add to that offense, Chris Godwin again, Mike Evans hopefully healthy, but even if he's not there, you have Emeka Egbuka now. So the situation got better for Baker, who's playing some of the best football of his career. It's an offense. Yes, it is going to be a new offensive coordinator there in Tampa Bay. But, we're moving him up a tier because, again, like I would rather, at price, I would rather have probably Baker than any of these quarterbacks so far. Because he's producing the most and he's the cheapest so far. That's what I think. Kyler Murray, kind of the opposite. We typically, quote unquote, overpay for Kyler. The fact of the matter is, he played in 17 games last year. He only had 308 PPR points, which, is good for 10th in the league, but I don't really think that's what we're hoping for with Kyler. From a rushing perspective, he's not really rushing for 800, 900 yards like a Lamar Jackson, like a Jaden Daniels. He's rushing for about 570 last year. The year before that, obviously,
a step up from your non-rushing QBs.
It is, but really, though, when you're looking at the last couple seasons, the unfortunate thing is he hasn't played full seasons. But 5 rushing touchdowns last year. So again, not really enough rushing upside though to like propel you up these rankings. And so you're looking from a passing perspective. I mean, he's never thrown over 26 touchdowns in his career. He's normally within the 20 to 25 range, and from a passing yards perspective as well, normally between 3,500 and 4,000. And so when you're looking at all of those combined, Kyler's not really giving you a distinct advantage. And we pushed Kyler last year, and I've got to say, I don't think it was I think, where we were drafting Kyler, it was about what he ended up finishing as. And so he was a fine pick, but he wasn't a steal at ADP by any means.
No.
And I definitely don't think that's the case this year either, as much upside as he does have.
Yeah, and I will say with Kyler, like for a guy that invested in him in the Flock League because I was so sold on him in 2024, I took a 6-round shot on him. I was ecstatic about it. He was the cheapest rushing upside QB left on the board because I thought that he was going to be able to match the Jalen Hurts level of rushing capability. And I will say that, like, at the end of the day, owning him didn't screw me. He didn't screw me in games. He just wasn't winning me weeks very often. There are only a couple of weeks where I was like, yeah, he contributed to me getting a big W. But with consistency, high upside consistency, it's just not there. It needs to get there this season. And I do think that you'll be able to get it at a cheaper price. So you may be able to get Kyler at a more palatable price this season in fantasy, which is something to think about. But like at the end of the day, he just needs to deliver, and he hasn't for multiple years.
I'll be honest. Like I think if I'm going to take a shot on one of these guys, I think Mahomes is a good shot this year. Mahomes, even in his bad years as a quarterback one, his floor, we know now what his floor is to about 300 points, which is about the same as Kyler, by the way. But his floor is a low-end quarterback one. The nice thing about Mahomes is he hardly ever misses time. He has very rarely missed games in his NFL career. He'll get hobbled, but he will play through it. From a rushing yards perspective, he's always adding 30, 40 points on a season to his totals. The big difference is, he's not throwing for 35, 40 touchdowns anymore. And also from a passing yards perspective, his passing yards have dropped 1,000 yards his last 2 seasons compared to what it was. Yep. But I do think, Mahomes, I don't think there's anywhere to go but up for Mahomes this year. I think if any, he's going to do this again, or he's going to be even better, which is I think it's reason to buy into him. Brock Purdy, nobody wants to talk about, but honestly, it's who people should be talking about because Purdy, yes, he was missing some of his guys last year, but when you're looking at a per game basis for Brock Purdy, he does not get enough love, and Brock Purdy is cheaper than where we have him, and that makes him a really good value. We'd rather draft a Purdy. We'd rather just draft a Purdy, but 18.6 points per game last year, which was 10th in the league. The year before that, 19.2 points per game. We had a full offensive arsenal of Debo and Ayuk and Christian McCaffrey, things like that. He was 6th in the league, 19.2 points per game. And so I'm looking at Purdy, and this year, yes, you don't have Debo Samuel anymore, but you do get Christian McCaffrey back. You do still have George Kittle. Juwan Jennings was very good efficiency-wise last year. And so Purdy is always a low-end QB1. And so, again, I think he's a guy later in drafts you can snag. I think Bo Nix is very comparable in terms of their production profiles. With Nix, Nix was a rookie, and so I think a lot of people would argue that he has a higher ceiling, and I think I would agree with that. 19.4 points per game in his rookie year, which was good for 8th in the NFL. That's pretty significant in PPR leagues, and when you're looking at the rest of that team, they bring in Evan Ingram, so obviously bringing in anybody is a step up. Because outside of Cortland Sutton last year, it was not good. But you also have R.J. Harvey you brought in, and so even though they didn't really bring in like a receiver, I still think that he's going to have some better options this year. And I think Nix could easily build on what he did his rookie year, and it's going to make him a pretty good value here in these drafts. And then the two sophomores that we need to talk about, Caleb Williams and Drake May. Caleb wasn't awful last year. He definitely could have been better, but the coaching staff was awful. The situation was awful. And so I think this year when you're looking at Caleb in a Ben Johnson offense. Keep in mind, Jared Goff in a Ben Johnson offense was consistently a quarterback one. So now you have Caleb in that offense, throwing to DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Luther Burden, and Colson Loveland. I mean,
that's not half bad.
I think if you're taking shots later in the draft on QBs, he's a guy to take a shot on because of his offensive situation and because of his personnel. Drake May, obviously it's better, right? You move away from, Gerard Mayo and into Mike Vrabel, but Josh McDaniel is the offensive coordinator there, and I hate that guy's guts. Mm-hmm. But the one thing we do know about him is he can produce fantasy relevant guys. He can. May last year on a points per game basis was 24th, 14.4 points per game, but keep in mind he only played in 13 games. He wasn't starting the entire season, and he did a lot with very, very little there. I mean, they're bringing in Diggs, they bring in Kyle Williams, but most importantly, I think they bring in Travion Henderson, which will allow that offense to be a little bit more dynamic. A lot of people are very high on Drake May this year, and we are too. We just need to be, we need to acknowledge that with Caleb Williams and Drake May both, it could go either way in terms of their fantasy production, but they're both in situations, I think, set up to succeed this year. And I think that makes them decent picks when you get later into your fantasy football drafts. The top guy here in the C tier, honestly, you can make an argument for him to be in the B tier.
Yeah, I guess a little shakier here, though, with Justin Fields in a situation that I think is just a lot less than ideal compared to the guys that are going in the B tier. Fields, though, I will say with him, like his good games are great. He can score 30-plus points any given week because of how good he is as a true runner of the football. And really, at the end of the day, we don't know how much the Jets are going to want to utilize him in the way that he was utilized his first year in Chicago as a full-time starter. How's it going to look like compared to what was just a better situation in terms of coaching in Pittsburgh last season? Like, he was hit and miss last year for that small stretch of time that he was starting. He was hit and miss in 2023 with Chicago. But again, like I was mentioning with some of those games, he can score 31 points any given week, 23, 25. With Justin Fields, I think I would have him a tier higher if we were in a best ball format. If you're in a best ball league, I'd be a lot more excited about Justin Fields, and you can just get another more reliable pocket passer that can drop 15, 20 points every week, and Fields can drop you 10 points or 35 points. And that's a really, really nice pairing. It's a little less predictable, I think, week in and week out with Justin Fields and what you're going to get from him, which again is why he's going to be at the top of this C tier, but the upside and the rushing capability is undeniable in a situation where that offense is already so depleted that they might just want to use their best playmaker in terms of athleticism, and that would be Justin Fields at QB with Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, and seeing how those guys could really complement each other. We'll see what that offense looks like. Jared Goff plays a way different style. He's going to sit in the pocket. He's not going to move, and he has Amon-Ra. He has Gibbs in the air. He has J-Mo. He has Laporta. He has a plethora of weapons at his disposal all the time, which is why he's consistently been a quarterback one every single year. The reason Jared Goff is not a tier above is because we are baking into the fact that Ben Johnson is no longer the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. There's a lot of question marks surrounding how that offense is going to look from an efficiency and playmaking perspective this season. The playmakers are the same, but how are they all going to be utilized? Are they going to want to run the ball more now that Ben Johnson is out of that offense? Are they going to want to throw the ball more and as a result help Jared Goff produce even more than he has in past seasons? We don't really know. At the end of the day, there's enough question marks that Goff has got to be in this tier. Same with Dak Prescott coming off of an injury. He gets banged up consistently. He misses some time here and there. It was a significant amount of time last year, and it hurt a lot of people who owned him in fantasy. But I will say, with George Pickens now coming into that offense as a wide receiver too, that's going to be a nice little passing game, especially since they didn't go out of their way to go get a true lead running back in this year's draft. They're looking to make a lot of noise, I think, in the air specifically, as they've demonstrated year in and year out that they don't want to prioritize the run game. And then Justin Herbert is in the most run-centric offense that you could ask for in the NFL right now with Greg Roman. Obviously, Omarion Hampton going to the first round in this year's draft class to the LA Chargers. I think that just kind of throws a wrench into the plans that we had for Herbert and his potential fantasy upside this season. I will say it was interesting to see how much they utilized him in the run game last year because of that Greg Roman offense. Herbert has some sneaky rushing capability, and it's not going to be anything that blows you away, but it will elevate his floor a little bit as a QB, even though his passing volume is going to be down compared to what it was looking like in a Brandon Staley, Kellen Moore offense before Roman and Harbaugh came in. So Herbert probably going to be the lowest ceiling guy in this tier, but I think he's pretty reliable in what's going to be one of the better offenses of the teams in this tier.
Pivoting to the next year here, let's start with Jordan Love. It's kind of been a mixed bag. The two full seasons we have Jordan Love, we have completely different results, right? In 2023, he was the quarterback 5. He scored 330 points. He scored almost 100 points less last year in 15 games, and he was the quarterback 17. You saw, not really a decrease in touchdowns. You did see a little bit of a decrease in how much he was actually scrambling and getting some rushing yards, so that was part of it. But a pretty steep drop-off in passing yards as well led to a little bit of a production dip there. And so with Love, I think his most likely range of outcomes is probably somewhere in the middle there, which is going to be like the high-end QB2, low-end QB1 range is probably his ceiling this year, and so that's where we're going to rank him as well. From a weapon standpoint, you bring in Matthew Golden there. You still have Josh Jacobs. You have all of your quote-unquote wide receiver ones there, the guys we really don't know about. But he does have decent weapons, and that offense has proven that it will be productive. And last year, it is worth noting, the big difference between 2024 and 2023 is in 2023, you didn't have Josh Jacobs there. In 2024, Josh Jacobs took a lot of those. But again, Love still threw for 25 touchdowns in 2024. So, he was still throwing for touchdowns. The other thing to consider is he did miss 2 games, but
he was banged up all year, even when he was
and he was technically, he was technically hurt all year. So if you think that's part of the reason, Jordan Love could be a good value at that point. We only saw about 3 games from Michael Penix, but it was, 7 points, then 13, then 28 points. We're ranking him here because we think he's going to get a lot of volume, because we know he's a good passer. He has good weapons as well. He's playing with Drake London, as well as Bijan Robinson. So I think that offense can be pretty dynamic. But with Penix, he's essentially, this is going to be his rookie year for all intents and purposes. We'll call it that. And I think you kind of have to treat him as a wild card just because you don't really know what a full year of Michael Penix is going to look like there in Atlanta. Trevor Lawrence, we've seen multiple years of now, and he has been a quarterback 1. He was his second year in the league in 2022. But the last couple of years, he only played 10 games last year. Obviously, we remember the season-ending injury for Trevor Lawrence. But, in 16 games in 2023, he was the quarterback 13. He's gone through multiple coaching staffs now, and so whether this one is the right one for him to be fantasy productive, I'm not sure, but the Jaguars were so bad last year that it wouldn't have mattered even if he stayed healthy. It was just not a good situation for Trevor. And so Liam Cohen, obviously has a history of, getting quarterbacks to be fantasy productive. And when I say history, I mean last year with the Bucs, really. But it was a great offense, and it was very fantasy productive. And the Jaguars have a very good receiving tandem now in Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter. So the weapons are good for Trevor. It's just a matter of, does he put it together? I don't think, with who they brought in from a rushing standpoint, I don't think it's going to be like a Jordan Love situation where you have Josh Jacobs take stuff away, because, even though he had positive things to say about ETN here recently, I still don't have positive things to say about ETN. Bashal Tutin, well, I think he could be the guy there. I don't think it really matters. And so I think Lawrence, there's a good chance he could put it together this year. I think he's a nice little, a cheap guy to get as a backup quarterback if you have the roster spots to do it. Now, let's talk about C.J. Stroud. Stroud, we saw pretty much tale of 2 C.J. Strouds is what I would call it. In his rookie year, and, after you saw the results of it. So just think about his rookie year, though. We were evaluating C.J. Stroud during his rookie year against other rookies. When you're looking at him compared to the entire league on a total point standpoint, his rookie year, he was the QB 11, right? And so going from QB 11 to QB 18, 50-point drop-off, we've seen bigger drop-off so far in this video. So it's not like he totally fell off. On a per-game standpoint, though, he did play in 2 less games his rookie year, and so it's 18.7 versus 13.7, and that's really where the drop-off happens, right? You're talking about 5 points per game less. Why did that happen? He threw for about the same amount of passing yards. He obviously had more attempts in 2024 than he did 2023. His completion percentage was about the same. His yards per attempt went down 1. His rushing yards, he actually had more rushing yards in 2024 than he did 2023.
He was under duress more. That offensive line was worse.
He absolutely was. Yeah. And in terms of passing touchdowns, he threw for 23. He only threw for 3 less the next season. And so if you're wondering, where the production drop-off came from, it was kind of all over the place. The other thing to consider, he did throw for 7 more interceptions, so that's negative points against him in fantasy football. But Stroud is more of, when you're talking about adding 150 to 300 rushing yards, he is going to be a guy that if he's not throwing for 35, 40 touchdowns, then you're probably not feeling super good about having him as your quarterback 1 in your fantasy team, even though he's an amazing NFL quarterback. And so With Stroud, I think he is probably going to be a high-end QB2 again this year. I think is where he lands, high-end to mid QB2, and just going to depend on where the other guys fall. But I do think it's still a good situation for Stroud with Nico, with Mixon, with Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel. Like it's a good set of weapons. That offense, honestly, the offense got a lot worse, large in part due to the offensive line there last year, which was just
for sure.
It just fell apart. And so we'll see if the Texans can bring it back together. I honestly couldn't tell you, but we'll be conservative with Stroud as of right now, just because we really don't know what's going to happen in Houston.
Yeah, but he still definitely deserves to be in that tier above the guys that we'll have in
100%.
the F tier, who I think have a lot more question marks. You got JJ McCarthy, who just hasn't played. We don't know what McCarthy's going to do. We have no idea what he's going to look like in that offense. We have hints of what it could potentially look like because of how well Sam Darnold played in that system. KOC is the QB whisperer in the NFL, apparently. So I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful that McCarthy can continue that level of production that Darnold was able to sustain in 2024. But the other thing, too, is McCarthy has injury history dating back to college, and he missed the entirety of last season with the meniscus tear when he played like 2 quarters in preseason. He's got to stay healthy and on the field as well. There's just a lot of yellow flags, at least heading into the season with McCarthy, where I wouldn't be overdrafting him. If you're in Superflex leagues, this is more relevant. At this point, we're getting deep into backups. Tua has to stay healthy. Same sort of story when he's on the field. He's it's better than scoring 0 points off the field. He cannot get more concussions. Bryce Young really had a nice showing at the end of last season. You just wonder what his ceiling is ultimately going to be for a guy that really just is not going to consistently run the ball. He had a nice stretch after the bye week, 16, 23, 13, 13, 27, 16, and then 36 points. So aside from that 36-point game in week 18, which is kind of a crapshoot for everyone across the league, in terms of production, like he had one good productive game, which was 27 points in week 16 against Arizona. So outside of that, we haven't really seen the ceiling yet, but we saw some good flashes, at least with good quarterback play at the NFL level. Cam Ward is a rookie in a terrible, terrible, terrible offense. And again, I wouldn't say that he's going to be the next Jaden Daniels this year, but if you want to take a flyer on Cam Ward this year in an offense that is looking to be very poor, then you can take a backup quarterback shot on Cam Ward if you want to, just like we did with Daniels last season, where he looked to be in a terrible offense and ended up making it look really good. Cam Ward was still the first overall pick in the NFL draft this season for a reason, and he could absolutely elevate the play there. And Calvin Ridley, I wouldn't write him off either. He still had a 1,000-yard season last year. He's going to be able to do the same thing this season as a number one option there. Matthew Stafford, looking at the best wide receiver room that he's had in quite a while. Obviously, you had Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua together for a couple of years, but Cooper Kupp was banged up in and out, and he was on the wrong side of 30, and he didn't look like he did in his 22-point per game season back in 2021. But with Devontae Adams now in that offense, and Kyron Williams and Puka Nacua, like that's looking to be really, really good and really, really beneficial for Matt Stafford. He's a guy that you can plug and play any given week and feel pretty good about it. Geno Smith, honestly, I think is looking at a better situation than previously in Seattle now that DK's out of that situation. Tyler Lockett really kind of just aged out. Walker couldn't stay healthy. Stafford's now looking at Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, a couple of young rookies like Besh and Dante Thornton who can make some noise as well, and then Ashton Jency you can just lean on. Ashton Jency's going to open up some opportunities, I think, even in the passing game for Geno, because you're going to have to stack the box against a guy like Ashton Jency. Maybe that gives you some opportunity for Geno to get the ball in the air and throw some more touchdowns and be a little more consistent than he has been in past years in Seattle. Sam Darnold now in the situation that Geno was in previously. Darnold's not going to be as good as he was last season in a less than ideal situation, but I will say with Darnold, he could still be like a mid QB2, and I don't think that's outside the realm of possibilities. He showed some significant growth last season, and I think he could continue it even at an 80% level of what he showed in Minnesota last year.
And then here's the G tier and the A tier. Rodgers, Anthony Richardson. Look, we're Colts fans. Richardson and Jones could end up splitting starts this year. Like, Jones may win that job at the beginning of the year. Richardson obviously has rushing upside, but it hasn't proved to matter in his career. Rodgers, what hasn't really been fantasy productive, even though he has shown an ability to support, fantasy wide receivers and Devontae Adams last year, so that's at least encouraging. We don't really know who the Giants' starting quarterback's going to be, but they're not going to have rushing upside like AR will, or even like Daniel Jones will. Daniel Jones would have more rushing upside than those guys, and Tyler Shuck kind of in that tier as well. But all these guys are guys you really don't care about unless you're in Superflex leagues. So again, quarterback, it can be kind of a crapshoot, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the quarterback position in the sense that there's tons of parity year over year, but Hopefully this helps sort through that position. Make sure, again, if you play fantasy football, you drop a like, you subscribe. Those two things are free, they're easy, and they help us out a ton. We're trying to grow this channel, and you can help us do that. So we really do appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later.